All right, welcome to chapter 9. This is going to be a pretty short and sweet little chapter, but yet an important one, and probably the one that you're going to be most, most familiar with in terms of things you have seen in the past. So we're going to be looking at regression and correlation. And so one last time, our overview of what's going to happen here is we're going to use, so we'll use this new function on your calculator, linreg or linear regression, and then it usually has an ax plus b right after it to determine whether two quantitative variables have a linear relationship. So this is the first time and only time in this class we're going to be looking at two variables at one time. So far we've looked at one qualitative, those are our proportions, our percentages, and we've looked at one quantitative where we've looked at means and so forth, but this is the first time we're going to be comparing two. They will be quantitative. Okay, so there's two things that people usually ask when you compare two quantitative variables. The first one is there any sort of relationship between the variables? Okay, that question we answer using something called regression. And then the second question that comes up is how strong is that relationship? And that answer comes from looking at the correlation. All right, so let's go through one example here that'll show some of those, and it should also bring up some terms that you have heard before. All right, so we've got some information here about Old Faithful. Please take a minute to go ahead and read the info there about Old Faithful. And the first question we're going to ask is, what are the variables? Okay, well, we've got two, and they're listed right there, not only in the text of the problem, but in the chart at the right. So one of those is the duration of the eruption, and that's measured in minutes. Okay, so how long that eruption lasts. And then the other one is the interval between eruptions. And that's also being measured in minutes. Okay. All right, next question, and these are terms I'm sure you have heard before in other math classes, science classes, etc. They come up a lot. Which one is the independent variable? So the independent variable is the one that impacts or affects the dependent variable. And I know you're not supposed to use parts of words when you define others, but then the other way to look at it is the dependent variable depends or relies on, is influenced by the independent variable. Okay, some people kind of look at it as what comes first is the independent variable, and then the response of that is the dependent variable. So here, the independent variable is going to be the duration of the eruption. Okay, that's the one that's going to kind of come first, if you will. And then the dependent variable is going to be that interval between eruptions. So we're going to look at this from, however long that Old Faithful is erupting, then that length of eruption, whatever it is, has an impact, influences how long it is before the next eruption happens. All right, so in part C, describe what you expect the relationship between the variables to be. Okay, so what do you think was going to happen? So if we said, for example, the longer an eruption lasts, in other words, a long duration, what do you think will happen to the time between eruptions? Okay, so if Old Faithful erupts for 2 minutes, and then another time it erupts for 10 minutes, what do you think would be the duration between those? Which would have the longer or the shorter? Okay, well, I think it's pretty common sense to think, well, the longer it lasts, the more it's going to have to rest before the next eruption. So the longer an eruption lasts, the longer the duration between eruptions. Okay, and again, that's our guess. We're going to look at that and see if that happens. So another term you've probably heard before, a scatter plot. A scatter plot is a graph of the data plotted as ordered pairs. The independent variable goes on the horizontal axis, the one across the bottom, and the dependent variable goes on the vertical axis. So I have used Excel to graph this one for us. Okay. And then looking at that scatter plot, how would you describe the relationship between the independent variable and that dependent variable? Okay, so here are the 3 things we need to mention. Okay, one of the things we need to mention is, does it look linear or nonlinear? Now, this is not about, is it a perfectly straight line? Okay, very rarely is actual real life data a perfectly straight line. The question is, does the trend seem to be like it is a line, or does the trend seem to be like it's not a line? Maybe it's like a sloping upward curve, something that would look like this. Maybe it's got like some swoops and changes in it. Maybe it's this like jaggedy, you know, all over everywhere kind of a deal. Think like gas prices or whatever. So what is the overall trend? Okay. When you look at the data up above, it's not perfectly linear, but again, I think you could see perhaps like kind of this overall trend you could draw in here. You could put that line a few different places. It's just a guess right now, but I think you can see that it is fairly linear. Okay. The next question that gets answered is, how strong of a relationship is that? Okay. I'm going to skip over here. Very weak, or very weak to very strong. So very weak would mean it doesn't look like it's very linear at all. Very strong would mean it looks like it's really, really linear. Okay, like all those points are almost in a straight line. I would probably call this one a fairly or moderately strong relationship. And then the last part that needs to get looked at is the relationship positive or negative? So in a positive linear relationship, your line is going to go uphill. In a negative, Teddy, no bark. In a negative linear relationship, your line is going to go downhill. And again, I think we see that this is pretty clearly a positive linear relationship. So as for the answer to this question, I would say that this is a moderately strong, Teddy, no bark. Teddy. This is a moderately strong, positive, linear relationship.